Hey, and welcome to Matt and Jess TV. I am Matt Roast here with Jessica Bun Bun. This is our reaction and review for Under the Bridge episode 8. This is the finale of this limited series about what really happened to Reena Virk. And I think we all went into this show with sort of a general idea of what it could do really well. It has two
Mhm,
big names in Riley Keough and Lily Gladstone
mhm.
fronting up the cast. It's telling this true crime story, and yet I'm coming out of this feeling largely divided in that the thing I think it did the best are these performances by the young actors and giving these characters a part of the spotlight. But unfortunately, for one reason or another, it never quite figured out what it was that the show wanted to do. And that sort of crisis of identity coursed throughout the entirety of it, leading into this finale that I kind of just walk away from feeling like they didn't really hit anything.
Yeah, I mean, going into this show, I knew a little bit about this case because I grew up in Canada and it was on the news when it had happened. Going into this show, I thought that the show was really going to be more about Reena Virk and what happened to her and who she was and the justice that happened or didn't happen afterwards. But this whole like second half has felt like this is the Rebecca Godfrey story. And I've just been with her and her feelings about everything that's happened. And it's left me in this finale feeling disappointed. I started the show out being really excited to jump into this world, to see what's going on, to see how they were going to tell this story, a very complicated story,
Mhm.
because we've seen it in the comments and it's been portrayed on the show where Reena Virk is someone who is a complicated person. She was a very young person, and they showed both the good in her, the bad in her, the gray areas in her, as people in general are. They're not all good, they're not all bad, they are all things. And typically, when you get stories that are based on real cases, the person who's been killed is typically painted with one brush where it's they are angelic, they are perfect, this didn't deserve to happen to them. And I'm going to say that this didn't deserve to happen to anyone, not to Rena,
Yeah.
not to anyone, regardless of what she did to her father, the mistakes that she has made, the good things that she did, the bad things that she did. That's what made this show compelling to me at first, that I was just like, oh, wow, here's this story of Virk where they're going to show both sides of her, the good things and the bad things, and not just, oh, she was this perfect angel, did nothing wrong, and didn't deserve this. She absolutely didn't deserve this, but they did show all sides of her. But then we got into this finale, and I was like, everything is still really focused on Rebecca, which is not what I came into this show for.
Yeah, so I think this is a show that really set out to have all these different aspects of it where you have the events that happen that you're trying to portray, but then you also have this element of fiction that you're throwing in there. And then you're also sort of bringing in the sort of Capote movie aspect
Mhm.
of it where you're telling this story about a woman who's a real life person who wrote a lot of the source material this show is based on, and you're trying to figure out how to incorporate that. And it tried to do too many things, I think, fundamentally, and that's what ended up not allowing it to really land exactly where it needed to. Now, the finale had some great moments, it had
Mhm.
some pretty bad moments. It really is throwing all this different stuff at the wall, and we'll examine it piece by piece. But before we do go further, be sure to hit that subscribe button. That is a great way to make sure that you don't miss any of the other coverage that we have here at the channel, especially because over the next couple of months, things are really going to be crazy with the amount of programming that's out there.
Yeah, there's a lot of programming coming up for us here at the channel, like House of the Dragon, The Boys, The Bear, I mean, Evil, Interview with the Vampires going on. There's
Mhm.
so much that is happening right now. And another great way to help support us and to get some extra coverage of these
Mhm.
shows is to join our Patreon. And we'll have a link for you down below for that, where you can get live streams with us every
Mhm.
week and join in the community there talking about these shows, plus some stuff that we don't cover as well.
Okay, I'll start with the best part of this finale. And to me, this is ironic. Of course, the same thing I've said for weeks. It is the performances by these young actors in these roles, I think, are really next level. And I'm coming out of this being like, why couldn't we just have more of them? Why couldn't we have spent more time trying to understand why Kelly was the way that she was, why Josephine acted the way that she did? Is there a chance that somebody like Dusty could get on the other side of this and try to improve her life? Like, I think these are the people who were the most interesting, just because these are characters we don't really ever see on TV. We don't see that many, super flawed teenagers in this era, all the different things that were sort of influencing them, the way in which family played a role in their lives. This is sort of like a right on the cusp of before the internet starts to take off. It's a really interesting era. I wanted more time with them because there was something so refreshing about all of that. And I know it's weird to say refreshing on a show that is this dark, but I really enjoyed that part of it, and I just wish there was a lot more of it in the finale.
I wanted to see more of Kelly in court.
Yeah, I agree.
Like, there was some there, and what we got was brilliantly acted. I mean, the young actress that's playing Kelly,
Mhm.
10 out of 10. Like, that's a really hard role. And that breakdown that she had on, the stand it was grim, it was difficult, it was strange, like watching her pull out an accent all of a
I
sudden.
know.
Like, it was so strange. She's such a strange person. And
Mm.
I really do wish that we had gotten more of her background. Like, why was she in Seven Oaks? Her parents are wealthy. They're there for her throughout this whole thing. They're upset by it all. So what really happened in that background? Like, I'm very curious.
I think that it's critical because I think the show really wanted to try to say at times that, okay, this is the story about what happened to Reena Virk. And I think in order to understand fully what happened to Reena Virk, we need to understand why the killer did what they did
Hmm.
in that moment. And yeah, I think we get little pieces of it where there's this obvious jealousy around
Yep.
Josephine, but there's also still this lingering question of, okay, well, why was Kelly so jealous? What put Kelly into this position where mentally she was so dependent on this friendship with Josephine? Like, what was this push and pull really about? And they
Yeah.
didn't, instead of going there, they instead went on like all these other detours that just didn't feel like they were anywhere near as important for this story.
Yeah, it was kind of strange because they really did build up this friendship with the two of them, that Kelly really needed
Mhm.
Josephine, that she was so important to her. She would do anything for her. She would kill for her. That when all of the rumors started and Rena was calling everybody and saying all these things, that we had this moment with Josephine on the phone with Kelly saying, I want to kill her, sort of thing, like lashing out.
Mhm.
And Kelly taking that to that extreme of like, oh, this is what she wants. Okay, well, I'll do anything for her. But then, of course, we see later this recording that Cam plays for Josephine where Kelly has rolled on her to
Yeah.
basically say, listen, this was all Josephine. It was everything that she wanted done. Like, she's the person that's really behind all of this. And it's kind of like, okay, if we're building up this story that that's what this is about, she will do anything for this friendship. We've seen Kelly in this episode and the last episode just basically leave Josephine, left her at the detention center, rolled on her to be like, oh yeah, she's the mastermind behind it all. It's not me. And I understand that she's in self-preservation mode, but at the same time, if it's really about like obsession and this friendship and I'm willing to do anything for you and she's bragging about it, then why would she all of a sudden roll on Josephine?
It's that missing piece. And, like we
Yeah,
both like
I
to
need more.
we like to put together puzzles sometimes, and it felt like they gave us this full puzzle, but there were just like these three pieces they didn't give us. Instead, they gave us these other pieces, and we're trying to fit them into the puzzle, and it's just like, okay, these don't fit at all. Are they from a completely different puzzle? Because it brings me to the number one issue I had in this finale, and this is not something that's even been an issue through the entirety of the show, but it was pretty glaring in this episode, which is this scene where Cam figures out more of what's going on with her biological family
Mhm.
and how she ended up being with her adopted father. And reconciliation is a really important subject. Like, I'll say that from the get
Yeah.
go. Like, I'm a dual citizen. I lived in
Mhm.
Canada for years. Like, I understand that what happened with First Nations communities all over the country is devastating and
Yep.
terrible. But
Yes.
it also didn't fit into this show. This is not a show that has spent that much time on that. That is a completely different show. If you want to do a season 2 where you say, okay, we're going to take this fictional character of Cam, bring her over to one of these communities. She can understand, her history. Maybe her skills as a police officer will come into use in some sort of case or whatever. If you want to do something like that, that's fine. I don't have any problem with that. But trying to bring in that into this story when this story hasn't been about that, it didn't make any sense. It took me out of the story that was being told, and I'm sitting here being like, okay, instead of these three little puzzle pieces that don't work here, why didn't we spend those 4 or 5 minutes trying to get to understand Kelly a little bit better, like trying to do something that is productive for this case? And once again, this is the problem with sort of inserting fiction into a show that has
Mhm.
otherwise been truthful. And Lily Gladstone did as good of a job with the material as she could in that scene, but it just was like, this is a scene from, I don't know, another show.
Yeah, it felt tacked on at the end. They had barely talked about her adoption and how she fit in with her adopted family and everything that was going on there. They mentioned it, but it was real brief.
Yeah.
Like, if they wanted this to be a really compelling story where it really reached people and didn't feel like it was just tacked on at the end, they needed to add a few more episodes, or they needed to take away some of the Rebecca storyline to give to the Cam storyline, so that by the time we got to this scene at the end, like, there was a minute there that I felt like I missed an episode, like, where this was kind of coming from. It felt like it was coming out of not nowhere,
Mhm.
because they talked tiny, tiny bit about it, but it felt like it all of a sudden, like, the truck was barreling down the road where before it was just parked at the diner having a sandwich. Like, it was just a very
Mhm.
fast all at once, and it didn't work.
Yeah, it just didn't need to be there for this show to make the sense that it needed to.
Okay, talking about things that made me feel like I think I missed an episode was everything that happened with Rebecca. In the last episode, we saw her at court listening to Warren, and her last sort of words to him were like hugging him and being like, "Don't worry, I'm going to tell your story. Your voice is going to be heard." That was sort of the last feeling in the last episode, which frustrated me to no end. However, we get into this episode and it's almost like that never happened. All of
Mhm.
a sudden, she's not seeing him anymore. She's not really talking to him. She's not going there anymore. She's not really with him. He's kind of like, "Where have you been?" And, "Hey, I have an opportunity here to tell everything, and I can invite somebody, and I want that person to be you." And she's like, "Oh, I don't think that's a good idea." I'm like, did I miss an episode? Like, you were all in on this kid to do anything to give him a voice, to make sure his story is told, his voice is heard. Where was the flip where that all of a sudden wasn't a thing? Because I felt like it just wasn't there.
Okay, so for a lot of this season, I have sort of drawn this comparison between Rebecca on the show and then for everybody who saw the Philip Seymour Hoffman take on Truman Capote,
Mhm.
how it played out there. Because both of these stories are effectively about a writer visiting the scene of the murder case,
Mhm.
talking to the person responsible for the murder and trying to figure out this information for the book. And
Yeah, and they even mentioned Capote on the show.
the reason why I think Capote works so well as a movie is that one, they sort of established how inherently selfish Capote could be, so it was easier to sort of buy that eventually he's going to try to distance himself from the murderer despite befriending him. But I think one of the other things that they did so well on that was sort of once they chipped away this whole I'm this author who's going to be working on this nonfiction classic about crime, and he started to really understand the gravity of the case, then he started to sort of be like, okay, I need to get away from all this. They didn't have a lot of a catalyst there properly for Rebecca, and they also made her so all in on Warren in the first place that it made it even harder to then buy that all of a sudden she's going to be completely out. I mean, good on her, I guess, for having the reality check that I think we all sort of wanted from her over these past few episodes, where she's just like not acting like herself. But you have to have something to go from point A to point B. You just
Mhm.
can't like press fast forward because there's only 8 episodes and you need to get her there.
No, it felt like they almost need to just switch it. So this whole feeling of like, I can't come see you, I'm done with this, I gotta back
Hmm.
out, I'm going back to New York, need to be after he gave his testimony where he was testifying against Kelly and telling the truth of everything and just how involved he really was, because he absolutely was involved. He didn't just, kick her once and, stand by and yell, "Don't do it, don't do it." He was completely involved and explained in grim detail what he did and his involvement in it. And that should have then been the catalyst for Rebecca to be like, "Oh, I was completely wrong about this. I thought that he wasn't that involved. I saw him, as my little brother. I
Hmm.
also saw him a bit of myself, like all these different things that she was feeling and going through, to then hear the truth to be like, oh, wow, I was completely wrong."
I will say that Warren is at least connected to what may be my favorite scene in the finale, and that was his discussion with Reena's mom. Now,
Yes.
I've loved Archie Panjabi for a long time, so it's
Incredible.
not a surprise to me that she was great in this scene, but I think it's a really powerful sort of representation of the idea of forgiveness. What can
Hmm.
you forgive? How can you forgive? Like, there has also been a lot of discussion about Rena's family in terms of religion on the show, and they've shown a lot of the challenges that come along with it. But here you sort of see Rena's mother really lean on it as this idea of, my faith encourages me to have forgiveness. And we know, thanks to, the little section that they showed of sort of the where are they now, that
Hmm.
eventually Warren in real life does sort of use his own indigenous heritage to sort of better understand and move forward from what happened and get forgiveness from the family. Like, that's not something they fully had a chance or time really to show on this particular series, but through that scene, they sort of represented, okay, this is how we can get there. And I think it was
Hmm.
really, really effective in that way.
Yeah, because in the real story that happened, the Virk family was very much involved in helping Warren sort of move forward and get out of this.
Yeah, I think they gave us just enough there for us to be able to sort of look at it and realize, okay, that's exactly how they're going to get there. We have a
Yeah.
stepping stone, and that's really important for a show like this that's trying to portray real events that are in some shape or form bizarrely still playing out.
Yeah, I mean they gave us some wrap ups at the end of, sort of where are they now or how did it work out. We saw that Dusty is a real person and that she really felt like they didn't get enough justice, that they
Yeah.
really should have been in there longer, that there should have been a harsher punishment. She's had long regrets on it, that Josephine tried to escape a couple times and, went on to do what she ended up doing. And then we had what happened with Kelly. Like when that sentence came down of 5 years, I was shocked. It took my breath away. I couldn't believe it that that was the first sentence, because I know that she's been still dealing with it. So I was like, how did she go from 5 years to all this other time in jail? Like, how did that happen? And so it was good to see at the end that it was like, oh, she appealed and ended up with a judge who was like, oh, 5 years? No, 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 my friend. You are going to be doing much more time than that.
Yeah, I know that there are, other documentaries and other things out there that people can go and watch and read to get a further sort of example of what really happened. I think the show, by and large, they hit a lot of the important cliff notes. I just sort of wish coming out of it that they had focused even more on a lot of that and leaned more into their strengths rather than trying to tell the story of an author who wrote a book about the case, because then you're
Yeah.
trying to just do more than you really need to with the case that I don't think enough people, especially in America. Like, I
No.
wasn't familiar with Reena Virk before watching this show. I don't think you needed to sort of go to this meta level here when the story of Reena Virk was compelling enough to merit a limited series like this.
Yeah, I mean, even at the end with the wrap ups, they gave a wrap up to Rebecca and
Yeah.
had said that she had passed away, a few weeks before filming and that she was very involved with the scripts and everything that was going on. But I think for the people that don't realize that some of these characters are just characters like Cam, that she's not a real person,
Hmm.
I think that it would have been a nice wrap up at the end to be like, by the way,
Yeah.
Cam's not a real person. She's not based on a real person. So if you're looking for that person, that's why you can't find them. They don't exist.
Yeah. It just, the way in which the story was told was messy. It's an important story to be told. I just wish that the entirety of the show really was the same as those first couple episodes, because I came out of those first couple of episodes feeling so high on this show.
Yeah, me too. I was really high on the show and then they just really they dove too far into Rebecca for me. She was doing some things that made me really uncomfortable. I said this in the last
Yeah.
episode as well that we were talking about the show, like just her going to the teen parties and being like whatever in her 30s drinking with teenagers. In the last episode she's talking about going over to Connor's house and picking up whatever and oh, they're doing great and hanging out with them. I'm like, okay, these kids are all like 14 and 15 years old. You are a grown adult. Like,
Yeah.
it felt very creep show to me. I understand adults wanting to help teens, but there are
Mhm.
ways to do that where you're not like, "Hey, I'm one of you guys, hanging out with you guys and drinking and doing drugs and doing this and stop. Like you're not a teen, you're an adult and you have to be the adult in the room to still be able to get the information but not act like you're a teenager."
Yeah, they took things a little bit far here and there, especially with Rebecca. I was very curious about the story. I'm glad that I found out a lot more about Reena Virk's story through the show, even if the show itself was pretty imperfect. And, I think it's more than fair to say that coming out of a finale that was frankly a letdown. But we will, of course, have so many more mystery shows we're covering here. This
Mhm.
is our favorite genre. So, stick around so you don't miss any of those. Hit that subscribe button. Thank you as well to our patrons for your
Thank you.
support. Your support means the world to us, and we will see you guys here next time.